Hello and welcome to another episode of Project Sanity. It is July 14th, 2016, and just want to thank you all for joining us. We have a great show lined up for y'all today. We're going to be doing some headlines about what's going on in the news. We're going to be speaking with one of Bernie's national delegates from Washington State. We're going to be talking a little bit about the convention and what we're going to be doing covering it wise, give you guys an update there. And we're also going to take a deeper dive into racism and policing in America and some of the statistics around that. And we're going to have a full show with lots of people on. So bear with us as we work through all that. So one of the first things we're going to go ahead and get into is getting Nis on to go ahead and share with us some of the headlines that have been on. So Nis, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, of course, man. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. As you might imagine, the stories of late that has been taking up some time in the headlines have been about police brutality, systemic racism within police forces. And on Democracy Now!, they have had articles and interviews with a former Seattle police chief who, first of all, defends citizens' rights to videotape and film the conduct and behavior and actions of police. And he also condemns the systemic police racism and ties a nod back to slave patrols back when slavery was the law of the land in the United States. Furthermore, Democracy Now! Also brought earlier this week an interview with a professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude, who talks about him and his son, saying that you should leave the ballots blank because voting simply enforces the status quo, which threatens the lives of all minorities. So what he's basically trying to say is, if you're not in a battle state, leave the ballot blank. Send a clear message to the status quo, to the establishment, that business as usual won't do anymore. On Vice News, the ACLU is reported by Mike Pearl to be gearing up to go to war with Donald Trump in the Supreme Court if he becomes president. They are already in the process of preparing casework to be put before the Supreme Court for any and all of the unconstitutional proposals that he has been talking about, and to fight them and fight him from day one of his presidency, basically trying to make him into a lame duck president. And Vice also has a report about the shooting of an unarmed teenager in California, where a 19-year-old was shot repeatedly by police officers, including after he had been downed, including with a shotgun after he had been downed. The video cam has just recently been released after his sentencing, and civil rights movements are now looking into contesting this case. Furthermore, on the topic of both police and politics, The Intercept, their reporter Alice Sperry, reports that after weeks of violence in Cleveland, in Cleveland, they are preparing for chaos at the Republican convention, with the shootings, the police killings in Louisiana and Minnesota, and the ensuing protests and the sniper attack in Dallas. Many fear the convention in Cleveland could descend into chaos because of a complicated relationship between Cleveland minority communities and the police. And more than that, Baton Rouge's police force has been sued over the arrest of peaceful protesters, reports Robert Mackey, also of The Intercept. They have been sued in federal court this Wednesday for violating the First Amendment rights of dozens of protesters detained at demonstrations in the city last weekend. So this is a case we need to keep an eye on, because it could perhaps set a precedent for protesting that could be necessary. in the coming months and years. And finally, to put a bow on it, Donald Trump has both during his run for his candidacy as the nominee for as a Republican candidate for president, and in previous years ridiculed the Iraq war position that is held by his VP pick, Mike Pence, which once again shows that Donald Trump usually don't know where either his foot or his mouth, or for that matter, his brain is located when speaking to the press. So that is what I've had for domestic news for this week. And Richard, do you have any commentary on what's been going on?
Yeah, one of the things that definitely stuck out to me, and I think I'm messing things up here. Give me just a moment. One of the things that definitely stuck out to me was how the Republican convention is going to be in Cleveland, which means that people may not remember, but Cleveland Police Department is under a consent decree as a result of an investigation where they found that they were basically habitually violating people's Fourth Amendment rights, and also lots of police brutality, lots of violence. They came up with new rules, like no longer can use your gun as like a blunt object weapon, and if you're going to use a blunt object weapon and strike somebody in the head, you have to, whatever you're using it for has to warrant lethal force. So essentially it's considered a lethal strike, or like a lethal defense type, and lots of other ones people can check out. You can just Google the defense decree, and you can either see it on the site from the government, or you can check some of the news reports around it describing some of the more details. But I think this is going to be the event, and the convention in Cleveland is going to be, it's their first large-scale test of whether they're going to adhere to these things, and then whether there's going to be consequences if they drastically, violate them. So I think that's going to be something interesting coming out of Cleveland. Hopefully everything stays as peaceful as it can, and people's messages are heard. But it's a tinderbox, I think, for sure. Especially I think that they're talking about that there's going to be, because of the open carry rules in the state, that there's probably going to be a significant amount of armed either protesters or counter-protesters there. As I guess there's been some militia groups that have already reportedly been saying that they were going to go there to help support the police, and some things like that. So I think that it's going to be a tinderbox. I don't know if you're familiar with either the consent decree or whether some of those groups, Nis?
No, I'm not familiar with the consent decree.
Yeah, beyond, I'm trying to think of some more of the details off the top of my head, but essentially, like I said, there was an investigation. They found that they were doing those things, and then they had to agree to make some steps forward, and this is going to be one of the big chances or opportunities for them to show that they've significantly improved their policing. Remember, this is also the department that was under part of what spurred the investigation, and when people say Black Lives Matter and the protests don't accomplish anything, one of the things that they did is it spurred on the Tamir Rice case for further investigation, and led to this consent decree that we're now going to see the police supposedly operating under at this Cleveland convention. And so that's a very direct trail of people coming out in outrage, making an action, forcing more work to be done than would typically get done, and it having a direct impact on their future protests. So that's another point I wanted to encapsulate. Did you have any other further commentary you want to mention? I want to get Jessa in here shortly, which is one of Bernie's national delegates that we have joining us from Washington State. But if you had anything else that you wanted to wrap up on.
Not other than protesting is your right, but you have to be smart about it. So go to a law center or something like that, get a rundown of your basic rights. We are in the process of making a segment here, a regular segment with a lawyer from New York called Michael Rothenberg, who will come on and advise and answer questions about what your rights are. But if you miss that, go to a law center, find out what your rights are, find out what the limits of the police's use of force are, and what to do in which situations. Don't just go out there blind. That is my comment on that.
All right. Thanks for that, Nis. I'm just going ahead and setting up our shot here to bring Jessa on. And
Yeah,
so,
we are being joined by Jessa, who is a Washington delegate and who is the spokesperson for the Washington delegation, as far as I remember, or at least the press coordinator. And she has been doing amazing work with the Washington delegation and in coordinating the Washington delegation's work with the other delegations. And we are hoping that she will also be on regularly during our 12-hour-a-day coverage of the convention, which begins on the 24th and goes on to the day after the convention, doing a post-convention reporting on what's been going on. And of course, if the convention for any reason should drag out, we will also be doing our best to cover that. But we are only mortals, and there are only so many of us. But we here at Project Sanity and at the Progressive Army are working round the clock at the moment to set up and prepare for covering the Democratic Convention. So if you know anyone who has a stream or commentary or an inside line or who wants to be part of an interview or something like that, let us know. We'll put it in our documents, our information folders, so that we can bring these people on during the show, interview them, talk to them, or simply just stream their stream while we take a much-deserved break.
well, and on that note, thank you so much, Nis. I'd like to welcome and introduce everyone to Jessa Lewis, I believe, and just want you to go ahead and tell us a little bit more about what we might not have covered so far in introducing you.
So I am a single parent here in Washington State working in the emerging cannabis industry, and I definitely resonated with Bernie's platform as far as single-payer healthcare. Let's end this war on drugs that makes no sense and incarcerates people unfairly, and that those are some of my main talking points that I'm very passionate about.
Excellent. All right. And so one of the things that's come up, I know I wanted to talk. I know a lot of people are wondering, with in the news recently, there was Bernie coming out with a rally with Hillary, and he said some things, and then there was a call after that, and there's been people were a bit frantic and a bit concerned, and there's a lot of just different reactions. So I wondered if there was any clarity that you could provide us from your position in the Washington delegation.
One of the main things to pay attention to is he did not concede. He still is considered an active campaigner. Our delegates, we are not released, and so we are still held and pledged to vote for him. One of the things that he was able to achieve, which was something I was not expecting, was a roll call vote. Means that all of our votes are going to be counted, and will be publicly known how many people are for Bernie Sanders. Now, what some of the tactics are and things they're looking at doing after that, we don't know. And for some of it is just purely how do we prepare for something that we don't know, and at the same time, how do we not leak? And we don't know all of the conversations and things that were happening in the back room. Maybe it was purely there wasn't enough superdelegate votes at this point, and he didn't want to lose the platform. We know that the platform votes were being held over his head. And I know a lot of people worked on the platform personally, and they did not want all the work that they did to be, discarded. I don't know more other than that, other than we've just been asked to go into Philly to vote for him, to hold strong, and also to remember that it was never about the presidency. It was about starting a revolution. It was about getting people engaged. And that needs to be our focus, is helping to support the other candidates down the ticket, running for office yourself, getting fully engaged. That's where I think things are really going to start changing. It's not just about a presidency.
I think that's an important point about how it's always been about much more than just a single political position or a single election cycle, and that Bernie has done a great job of trying to stress that as much as possible. And I think a lot of people were just taken off guard in general by the how things proceeded and which the speed in which they happened and how much information was disseminated beforehand. I know some of the questions, and I don't want to harp too much on it, but some of the questions that people have been raising was, is there anything that, can we read anything out of him not filing a minority report at this point? And is there anything that to the allegations or any substantiation to the allegations that basically he was like you mentioned somewhat to that he was, it might have been he was in such a position where he had to do what he did in order to maintain the ability to push the platform forward. And why does that matter for folks? I think is an important thing for people. Why does it matter? A lot of people say the platform isn't binding, so help us understand why it matters to get that roll call vote, to have as many Bernie delegates there as possible to make sure that their votes are counted.
Well, and I mean, if, let's say, something comes up in the next 2 weeks, he has set himself up that he played by the rules, that he still is an active campaign, and if something does happen to the other candidacy, then he is perfectly in position to have a convention for a battle. You know, we don't know. Also, having a roll call vote, having it be obvious how many people actually support him, that is so valuable, even maybe more valuable than having a minority report read. We were fully expecting there to be some sort of acclamation vote, a voice vote versus an actual roll call vote. So having that roll call was a surprise, and definitely I think something worth being there and showing up and for saying, yes, we're here, we're not going anywhere, you need to deal with us, we're ready for these issues to be handled. And as far as the platform question that you brought up, the platform is the guidebook. It is this is our goal, this is what the party stands for, this is what we're going to be fighting for over the next 4 years. And yes, it is symbolic, but that's why it is important to fight so hard. We don't need to start having the negotiations and settle before we even start the fight. And that is what the Bernie delegates who are part of the platform process were calling for, was saying, let's be bold, let's be brave, let's start here instead of here. And I would love to see that platform really be adhered to, because so much sweat and tears went into that, and that was not a pleasant process, and it was a battle pretty much the entire time, and it was very contentious. And I just want to say, everyone that I know, especially Lerner and Deborah, who worked on the platform, just I love them and what they're able to accomplish.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into both behind the scenes at the national level and the local level and a variety of other levels, and I think a lot of people don't get as much recognition or credit as they deserve for the long hours that they really put in order to make these things happen. And if you start attending these types of things, you'll see the type of work that's involved. And I think that it's important for people to understand that if we're going to be realistic about what I think is the next steps that we're talking about, which is engaging at the grassroots level, at all levels of government, and getting people, like you said, running for office. And if you could elaborate a little bit more about what you're familiar with that's going on as far as Washington and moving forward on those fronts.
Of course, we have several campaigns. I mean, one of the first people that Bernie endorsed was Pramila, and I've been actively supporting and trying to get out there as much as I can for that campaign, because that is an important one for us to win. And the more that we can get into office that have been tagged as that style of progressive, like a populist progressive, is going to send a clear signal to where we want things to continue. And there can be a coalition government that can be formed on the left that is more inclusive and more open. And Bernie's campaign, and even on that call that he had with us that night, he said it's his goal to have at least 100 candidates next year that are being supported by this amazing grassroots movement that is building. That was the thing in 2008. I was a part of the coordinated campaign for Obama and Gregoire here in Washington State. And there was so much grassroots efforts that went into that election, and then as soon as he was in office, it was nowhere. It was gone. So all those relationships, all that work, all that learning didn't go anywhere. And I really believe that Bernie's plan to actually keep that grassroots movement in effect and to start everywhere from, city councils, school boards, you name it, all the way on up, that's where people get trained. And that's where in 4 years, you're going to see people who are battle tested and have proven themselves and are going to be actually competitive on the national stage and changing things from all levels.
That's that's what I like to hear, and I know hopefully we'll be able to stay in communication in the future, and we'll be able to be on the convention and talk about how those things are progressing and what are some of the roadblocks that we're finding and what are some of the successes that we're really proud of as far as locally and then with working with other groups. I'm going to go ahead and give Nis an opportunity to ask you any questions I might have missed or just anything that might have come up between. So Nis?
Yeah, hi, Jason. I would be very interested in hearing about your thoughts on whether or not somehow a miracle can be pulled out and Bernie Sanders gets the nomination anyway.
So we are, as a delegation, preparing for any scenario as much as we can. You know, of course, at this point, the campaign is staffed quite leanly, so it's all a grassroots organization at this point. Outside of that, I can't tell you much, but we are preparing for communication and making sure that if something happens, if something comes up, that we're going to be ready to go because it is important to have a candidate that excites people and that will get people turning up. I mean, that is one of the biggest concerns about having a candidate with such high and favorable ratings is that people won't show up to vote, and that hurts local elections, and that hurts communities, and we want to have, no matter what happens, we want to make sure that these down-ballot races have the votes that are needed because this is what really impacts communities. And yeah, I think we're in a good spot if an opportunity opens up.
Okay, so I have heard that some people have said, okay, I'm not going to Philadelphia as a delegate. It's not worth it. I'm not going to spend the money or the time because Bernie threw in the towel. Now, I'd like for you to start by addressing on what your thoughts are on Bernie throwing in the towel because he had a call with the delegates the same day that I assumed you were a part of.
Yes.
I would also like to hear what you're doing about delegates leaving, and yeah, thank you.
So as far as Bernie throwing in the towel, how can you when it was never about just becoming elected as president? It was about starting a revolution. It was about creating a network of people who are educated and now trained and understand the grassroots process and how do you really engage. So on that respect, he hasn't gone anywhere. We have no idea what sort of tactical moves. It was just the reality of, like, this is a situation, I'm not going to be able to get over this hump. And if that's the case, then I just want to say, like, he fought so hard, and everyone else fought, and it is something that we need to be proud of. Like, this was never expected to be easy, and we were never expected to get as far as we did, and the records that were broken are something to be noticed and definitely celebrated. As far as people not showing up, I just want to say you were elected by your communities. He has asked you to be there. People put their trust in you and their faith in you, and I hold sacred all the people who voted in the process to get me where I am today, and I will show up there and nothing will stop me, and it's not over, and I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, so I've heard that some of these people who are now being subbed in for the people who are rotating out, that emergency funding is going on to try and raise money to enable these people who doesn't necessarily have the hundreds and sometimes thousands of dollars required to go to Philadelphia. So what would your pitch be to someone, like the pitch of, hey, fund these people so that we can make Bernie president? That's a pretty great pitch. But as evident from our chat, a lot of people are looking at this party platform as toilet paper, basically. So what would your pitch be to get people to help fund these people to get to Philadelphia?
Well, one of the biggest things is that we did make quite a substantial amount of progress, and the most important thing to do is to show up. And they are not going to listen to us if they think we're just going to take our toys and go home. And we have to be present on the street and on inside that convention hall saying, this is what we demand, this is what we're fighting for. And like how silly would you feel if you missed out on the opportunity to actually be a part of something big? And we have no idea what to expect when we're there. I've been at a convention before on the outside as a guest, and I was able to get inside some of the events with guest credentials. But I think that this is incredibly important that people see how important it is to show up. I mean, democracy is the people who show up. I mean, it's the people who vote, the people who knock on the doors, the people who make the local party politics happen. Those are the people who actually push a platform and push the direction and decide who gets endorsed, who gets the party's resources. So as far as funding delegates who are showing up, I mean, I'm taking an unpaid week off of work. I'm leaving my daughter, and this is not anything that's easy. That's why Vice News is doing a report on it. Local news reports are showing how much of an economic impact actually going to Philadelphia is. The hotel rooms are $350 to $700 a night. The plane tickets at this point are over $1,000. Food, everything else that you can think of are going to be incredibly expensive. And this is not a fun little vacation. We are going to be working from 7 in the morning till 11:30 p.m. at night, and there's not going to be sleep. It's going to be a push, and from everyone who are outside on the streets to the people inside the convention hall, we're showing up to say, hear our voices. This is what's important to us. And if you can't go, or even if you can and have anything extra, please chip in to any of the crowdfunding campaigns, or check in with your local party saying who needs the funding to go, because democracy is who shows up. And we've got to show up.
Okay, so just to bring things into perspective for people, for our audience, after the U.S. Revolution, there was a French Revolution. Now, the French Revolution started very famously by the king calling the different stratas of society together for a parliament to help fund their deficit. And the citizenry were starving, and the citizens who were going to this convention were actually called out as traitors, because they would just blue ribbon, they were just okay whatever the rich needed and wanted, and the citizenry would not get anything. This actually started to happen, so the citizenry walked out of the parliament, bringing with them many clergymen whose conscience could not support what was happening, and a few nobles. And as their gathering grew, and the newspaper supported them, and the people in the street supported them, more and more people had to go to this People's Convention, the Parliament of the Tennis Court, which on its final day, the king himself had to go sit down in a session and sign the law that this convention had made on their terms. So I'm not saying this is going to happen at the DNC, but you never know what is going to happen. And there are thousands of people going to Philadelphia, not just to get inside the convention, but also to be outside and to influence it on any and every level. So you cannot know what will happen at this convention.
Yeah, no, and before we let Jessica go, that was one of the questions I kind of had was, is there a possibility that we end up in a situation where the Bernie delegates can recognize that they've basically been blown off, and that they would act in some way to establish that, to make it clear that they were not okay with how things had transpired, in some sort of public display at the convention, perhaps a walkout.
There's been, yeah, I mean, there's been conversations, and at this point we have no idea, and I'm not going to forecast anything. And it's one of those where hopefully the relationships and bonds that we've been building over the last couple weeks and couple months is strong enough to where we just have faith in each other, where if we get that text or something that, or if word filters down through the crowd, then we go. I really hope that the Democratic Party can see the values that were there, that this is the future of where this country is headed. I mean, how many of the young people, the 45 under, like, this is what we want. We want to join the rest of the world when it comes to affordable education and single-payer health care and social justice and everything else into transparency, and that we're not ready to just settle, and that it's time to join the rest of the developed world and to actually be the beacon for democracy that we claim to be.
There seems to be a theme throughout a variety of aspects of politics, government, and society where we've assumed that we've accepted a certain state of affairs, and I think throughout all of them you see a thread that people are trying to make it very clear that this is not an acceptable state of affairs, that significant changes must happen and with haste, and that we can't continue to linger on these things. And so I see it at the convention, I see it in the protests out on the freeways and in the streets of major cities. I see it in a variety of different places, whether it be the economy or the climate or a host of different issues. And I think those in power are going to have to recognize what we're saying, hopefully, and hopefully that we can pressure them in positive ways to make the positive changes that we need. So anything else you wanted to share with us, Jessa, before we move on and let you get back to the many duties you have ahead of you?
At this point, just, I know this is a cheesy quote, but, a revolution without dancing is a revolution not worth having. And I think that folks are getting a little down. And the news of the last bit, everything from the shootings and the election results and direction of where things are going, not being where we want them to go. Just have heart and celebrate the beautiful people that are around you and the connections that you've made, because it is that joy and it is that deeper connection that will sustain and drive where we're trying to take things, and that it's okay to laugh and enjoy yourself a little bit, because this is going to be a long road. And that we're not going anywhere, and have those relationships and friendships there. Don't burn out. So take a moment, go enjoy nature, go enjoy your kids, and smile a little bit, and just be like, you know what, we got this. We're not going anywhere.
That is an excellent note to leave on, Jessa, and thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to having you back again and talking with you during the convention, and hopefully you'll be bringing us very exciting good news from the floor.
we're going to do that.
Yep. All right. So again, thank you so much. Thank you so much again for joining us, and you have a great evening.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
All right, Nis. Now, it's been a while since we've mentioned, where it is that we are at, what channel we're on, how people can find out more about us. Could you help us with that, Nis? Could you help us?
I don't know. You are watching the Project Sanity show, and I am Nis Pedersen. You can find me at Scandianvia on Twitter, and this is my co-host, Richard Green, and you can find him at Richard Green? No. At Progressive Greens. You can contact the Project Sanity show at nis at progressivearmy.com. And you can now find the Project Sanity YouTube channel. And if you look really hard, you can also find the Project Sanity at Project Sanity Show on Twitter, and you can find the Project Sanity Show on Facebook as well. And we will start filling those things out with content. And you are watching us right now on the Benjamin Dixon Show channel, who is graciously letting us and other Progressive Army shows be on his show until we pick up our own audience. Benjamin Dixon will not be on later today. Unfortunately, he had a death in his family, and he will not be on the show. So Anoa will be stepping in for him. So please send him your condolences and your regards. Let him know that you're in his thoughts and prayers.